those geese are food. You know, immigrants, food. Their chest freezer had about 8 different kinds, 20 different kinds of wildlife in it, probably moose, bear, deer. And in my childhood, and this is where I get a little off the humor, is I learned how to hunt, fish, survive in everything. My father was a child in the Second World War in an area where partisans fought the Nazis, literally fought fascists. And Luciano was in the Italian army, switched sides to the Allies, and was in a German prisoner of war camp. He actually witnessed everything. And I just thought it was normal to learn how to hide and survive and run in case the secret police are coming for you. So that was my whole childhood. And I didn't realize that it kind of set me up for where I am now and how I think and how I learned to identify threats in the world. So I'm going to get my clicker here. Where'd the clicker go? It's right. Where'd it go? Haha. Oh, whew. I did something there. Okay, so I just thought this was fun. So this is me. I'm the yearbook photographer. I'm about, let's see, Canada. We used to have grade 13. Imagine a free year of school before you go to college. That's me as a yearbook photographer. See, skinny jeans were around in the 80s. I have a real connection to animals. I ride horses. My wife she's from Ohio. I moved from the United States, from Canada to the United States, and I met my wife, and she grew up in rural Ohio, and I got into horses. And the connection to animals is a very important part of me understanding, or part of who I am as a Canadian, because you don't have to hunt and kill every animal either, but they teach me a lot about the world. I believe in firsthand witnessing. I don't want to just show you photographs of myself because, hey, this is me and it's about me, but it's more about, it's important to verify who the people are taking the photographs that you look at, especially in this era. So that's me in Muammar Gaddafi's tent up in the left. And these are the things I care about. This is where I go to report from heads of state, that's the Canadian Prime Minister visiting, with children in Afghanistan, coal miners in Ukraine. That's a drug tunnel from Yuma, Arizona into Mexico. And this is me up in the Arctic, and this is me learning, spending time with, on the lower right, a lot of my indigenous friends who I don't just think of people who I photograph, but are my teachers. So we're going to get to a little introduction of some of my work, then we'll get into the Arctic. So I met Ken because I worked on this project and I didn't know how to edit. You know, taking photographs is a very important skill, but editing and knowing how to edit and then take photographs because you're going to edit is a really important skill. I'll talk about that at the end. So Canada, it's one of the #1 places in the world for mining of anything. Uranium, gold, copper, nickel, everything in your phone. There's over 22 metals in your phone come from places like this. This is in northern Quebec. So this is film, medium format film for those of you who don't know. And for all the paperless world we're in, where we're not, we're going to recycle, all your recycling goes to places like this. That's 2 football fields. That's a smelter in northern Ontario. So also, obviously, Ken talked about me being interested in social political issues. I'm interested in workers, injuries to workers, the politics around work. And this was an edit Ken helped me actually put together. This was done. Was the workshop, was that in here or was it in Oakland? Oh yeah, I remember walking to Oakland back then. I thought, wow, this is kind of dangerous area. I'm going to show you some work in context because I want you to see captions. Captions are important. So when we look at social media, I think I want to have a little media literacy when we talk about or enforce it or sort of encourage it. Captions are important. So when photos are just popping up on social media, I think it's really important to understand, like, who took the photo? Were they really there? Can I look them up? Can I authenticate who they were? So civilian casualties in war is a really important part of me when I cover part of how I think when I cover work. I did work on the Mexican border. I did a project with a think tank called the New America Foundation, and my bosses at the time were Steve Cole and Peter Bergen, 2, if you know who they are, important journalists who covered Afghanistan and the post 9/11 world. And I'm just sort of giving you some highlights before we get into the Arctic. And so these are some pictures for National Geographic. That's on the left, that's the door to the parliamentarian's office in the Senate side of the Capitol, and on the right, that's the door to the Senate. Tear gas. So, and I think it's important when we talk about aesthetics and all the things that contribute to really important photographs and how they look. But then there's moments like this. This is 1:30 on January 6th. That's Vice President Pence about to lead senators to the House to do the vote certification. And I think that this is a really important photograph because no other photographers wear than me because it's not a very exciting photograph. So, but I think it's really important because I had no idea what was going to unfold after I took this photograph. So just a couple of highlights from that work. You can see it all on my website. Handing out guns in front of the Library of Congress, you know, after the attack. Aftermath pictures can be as important as the ones, and these are the kind of ones I've learned from Ken as my teacher and mentor. And understanding where you are when you work. I worked in the Capitol for 18 years, and I know every statue, every painting, every document, so I know where photographs can happen. And I was waiting for something to happen here. This is just after January 6th. So those are two soldiers with assault rifles. You don't really see that in the Capitol very often, if at all. They're reading the Declaration of Independence. So this is the next day after the insurrection. And on the left is the Vice President of the Confederacy. That math right there is really, this is, sometimes I'll have things in my mind ready for when that moment. This is January 19th, 2021. This is the White House Marine practicing open the Columbus doors that have been smashed after the insurrection for President-elect Biden Harris to go get inaugurated, the inauguration. So day before, day after. This is some recent work. This is protesters outside Capitol Hill, pro-Palestinian protesters protesting while Netanyahu's giving a speech in the House. So you don't got to photograph what's happening to talk about it. So that's just some new work. So let's get into the Arctic. Anyone here ever been to the Arctic? Cool. Okay. I think it's a really vital place. And I'm going to speak, obviously I have like 45 minutes in quite generality. So if there's a scientist in here, an expert, just give me a little slack to just be general. I know there's a Coast Guard person here. I'm a little nervous, only kidding. So when we think about the Arctic, just think of it like this. It's like the air conditioner of the planet. Okay? The ice is up there. The water goes underneath it, takes a break from the sun. This is very simplified, and comes out. We have to imagine the ice cap being gone. The ice cap is kind of permanent and shrinking, okay? And there's two kinds of ice. There's sea ice, like water freezes, and there's ice on top. And then there's glaciers. Glaciers form on land and fall into the water and turn into icebergs, okay? So after the Second World War, I'm not going to show too many maps. I promise I'm going to show my photographs. The United States, the West, lines start forming, enemies, Cold War is beginning, and they're like, wow, they got atomic weapons too, and like, they can attack us. And those are the range of bombers that can attack the United States. Now I'm going to get to an interesting thing a little later on. I want you to notice, here's Finland, okay, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Baltic countries, Russia, North Pole, Greenland, which someone said they want to buy, and there's Canada. And you know what? There's Alaska. America is an Arctic nation. How many people thought of America as an Arctic nation? An Arctic nation. It's one of 8. So anyway, so we know where we are, right? And most of this area up here, okay, is also permanent ice, okay? This Thule is a U.S. base up here. It's always been there. Anyway, so they're like, oh my God, if you've seen Dr. Strangelove, shortest route of attack is over the North Pole, bombers or missiles, or hey, 22 miles off the coast. Someone said they could see Russia from there. Just some jokes, got to keep it light because it gets dark. Anyway, so they're like, we better build a radar line to detect this coming. So that pink line, it's called the distant early warning line, now called the North Warning System, and it's been running for 70 years. And after I've been covering conflict and lots of different things, making notes, preparing, I just thought, for 70 years, there's been people at radars like waiting for an attack that's never come. And what really happens is, and one of our most powerful tools is we use our imagination, right? It's an imagined attack that could happen, but has not. So the rest of those colors are the full radar sort of defense system of North America, most of the United States. And I want you to note this area up here above Canada. I'm going to call that the archipelago. It's a bunch of islands. No one really, other than Greenland having a little bit of land up there, no one has that much territory up north. And there's a little passage above that pink line. That's the Northwest Passage. That's where they imagine it's going to become like a shipping lane. So, I come out of art school. I want to start being a photojournalist. And there's a few things happening in the early 90s. One, there's a diamond discovery in Canada, which the diamond mines are still operating. So Canada has a massive, I mean, Canada's stock exchange has mostly about 17% of stock exchange is natural resources. The next closest to that is New York or London at 1. So resource extraction is Canada's specialty, and it's a massive country. The only country that could probably rival it is probably Russia. So there's a diamond discovery. That's actually my photograph on the cover. But at the same time, there's a strike at a gold mine. That on the left. That's not my photograph. But it's important because during the strike that goes on for a year, one of the miners gets frustrated, builds a bomb, sneaks in the mine, sets the bomb, which we call it an IED, and blows up people across the picket line in what is technically a terrorist attack. Okay, that's 1993. Now, if we think about that, think about conflict beyond just tanks and bombers, okay? And then in 94, see that depleted fish stocks? Well, remember the East Coast fisheries that collapsed? A lot of European ships were fishing out all the cod fisheries and the turbot and collapsed the fisheries. Canada sent a warship out that fired on Spanish ships, impounded the ship and brought it in. So like conflict over natural resources has been going on for a long time. I kind of noted those things and I thought I'll get back to that one day. So that was 93. This is where I've done my field work, and we're back to a map. This is all the blue is where I've done my field work for this project. Some of those spots I've been multiple times, and I put red because it wasn't related to the Arctic, but I've been there. And this is Ukraine, and we'll get back to that in a second, okay? Because Ukraine is part of the first combat in the Arctic since the Second World War. Okay, so this is what happens when you're taking pictures in minus 60. Sometimes your shutter freezes because you're breathing, and the moisture from your mouth goes into the camera and freezes the steel together. And that's why there's no place on earth where the air can kill you. And I know it's funny, but it's actually true. Minus 60 will kill you. Minus 30 will kill you. But up there, it's pretty extreme. That's Celsius. By the way, at 40, it switches and then Celsius starts going lower. So these are one of the challenges, but it just talks about nature is the ultimate power. So now we're going to get into some photographs. So this is fishing at night, and there's, depending how far north you are, for a few months a year, it's darkness for 24 hours a day. Okay. This is fishing at night. That's his headlamp. These are Canada has volunteer Inuit soldiers in the north. They're rangers, and they're not for combat. They're more like search and rescue, pathfinders for other things up there. And so parkas are an Inuit invention. This is a photo of science. They wear red hoods so at a distance you can see them, because if you get lost, you'll die. That's why I say the archipelago. Not many countries know. In Russia, you'll still die if you go hit the coastline, but it kind of ends, right? Like America, you can go to all four sides, all these famous books like Jack Kerouac wrote. Canada, the roads end and then you die. It's the forest. Because nature is the ultimate power. The parka translates into animal skin. Parkas are Inuit engineering. It is science. They invented that. And that is something we all use. And I want to keep thinking about the Inuit being like the original scientists and engineers of the Arctic. So in 2008, Russia releases this video of this little submarine going to the North Pole and planting a flag on the bottom of the North Pole. And it's kind of like very provocative. Like the other 7 Arctic countries like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, are you saying like the moon, like this is ours? And that's kind of early on, leads up to where we are now, because right after that, the invasion of Georgia happens and things just keep unfolding. So a lot of countries start thinking, it's always been militarized up there. The military's up there. We better start. Can we go up there? Like we're in Afghanistan fighting this, it's counterterrorism war. So they start learning. These are soldiers who are not Inuit learning how to build igloos. Another technology. It's a tent built out of snow blocks. Okay. This is GPS. Okay. Lines of the snow tell you where you are. They tell you what direction the wind's blowing. You know where you're going. This is snowmobiling in a snowstorm. In Johaven, it's King William Island, which is, if you know about the Franklin expedition, how many people, the Franklin expedition kind of shapes everything up there. The British in the 1800s thought, hey, we're going to find that shortcut to go to our colony in India in the 1840s, and we'll get there faster instead of going there's no Panama Canal going, which someone else wants to buy as well or take over, go all the way around Africa or all the way around South America. So they go looking, the ships they're lost. They're 2 warships. And what happens is they get frozen up there. They don't follow the Inuit ways of survival. They end up, most of them die. There's cannibalism, and they don't find the ships till, like 2011, around there. And so survival. And when you do training is real. You can just die in the training. This is like minus 60. Canada has a place called Crystal City. This is it, Crystal City. And this is when I started realizing something was changing, because there were soldiers from NATO, British, French, German, coming to learn how to survive. These are all pilots. They're building a snow cave. This is the radar, the distant early warning radar. This is in Hall Beach. And so that radar extends from all the way in Alaska across Canada into Greenland. This is the largest operating oil field in the United States. It's in Deadhorse, Prudhoe Bay. And that was discovered by the Navy and brought into production and fast-tracked through Congress during the oil crisis in the 70s. So, signaling. Okay, this is just snow blocks painted with, this is because there's no cell service unless you're in a small town. There's no cell service up there. So if you crash, you have to know how to communicate with people. So you take smoke grenades, more indigenous technology, smoke signals from the tree line. So the tree line ends at a certain point because of the permafrost. Roots can't dig down. But the tree line is part of the subarctic. And when you go to Finland, and we'll get there eventually, they have a different weather system. Just check the clock here. I don't want to get in trouble. Ken's watching me. I'm doing good. When we think about technology, science is good, and depending on what your opinion is, and it can be many things, nuclear power is science and technology, right? So you have to ask yourself, is science good? Okay. But I will say this, the way we know that there's no land under the North Pole is because the Nautilus in the 50s, a U.S. nuclear submarine, sailed under the North Pole, because people thought there was actually an island underneath there. So there's no land under the North Pole. It's the Arctic Ocean. It's just frozen. But, submarines, we talk about icebreakers. So think about lobby groups. Do we need an icebreaker? Maybe we do. Or maybe I'll just sail my nuclear submarine up there faster than you and pop up through the ice, where you can't always pop up through all the ice. But anyway, this is the kind of submarine that hunts Russian submarines. So there's a whole secret, and you define for yourself what war is. Conflict, for decades, with Russian and American submarines dueling under the ice, okay? This is also a mobile spy base. This can collect information. It can go over underwater cables and collect information. It can watch other submarines doing that. When I was up there, they were testing torpedoes, and this is how they retrieve them. They have a GPS. They drill a hole. A diver goes down, attaches, and there's a whole way they take it out. But, there's metaphors in these pictures, right? Melting ice. And, really, when we talk about the planet, I like to think of this picture. The parachutists are the interesting thing to look at. But in the end, no matter what we learn to do or build, nothing can beat a mountain. You can't beat a storm. Okay? What I learned from spending time with my Inuit friends in the north is we always think we're destroying the planet. No, we're not. We're destroying the environment we need to survive on the planet. We'll change the environment. The planet will kill us and keep going. The planet's going nowhere. Because in the end, the mistake we make is nature is the ultimate power. And in the Arctic, that's where you see it very clearly. So I'm always trying to hide little things like that, or nuggets like this. So this is the first time, there's these firsts kind of happening. A C-17, which is the largest military cargo transport plane around, is arriving in Hull Beach, which is the center of the distant early warning line. And they unload these komatiks. Komatik is another indigenous invention by the Inuit. Except, I don't like asking questions, but I just want to know if people notice it. That design, so those sleds are held together with string. That's it. There's no nails, no screws, so they can move on the ice. The plane really can't go any further. They're going to attach these to snowmobiles. They used to have dog sleds. And these used to be made out of frozen animal parts. Some antlers, and just ice was the glue, right? And some sinews or tendons off animals. We're past the tree line. Wood is a colonial material. Anytime you see wood in the Arctic, it's not supposed to be there. It was brought from the south because trees can't grow in the Arctic. But if the permafrost keeps melting, maybe that'll change. But it's just interesting, to understand what materials tell you a story or tell you something. Survival means you can fall through the ice. I had to pass this test too. It really sucks. This is only minus 36. And I say only minus 36 because this is subarctic in Yellowknife. So you got to fall in. They ask you questions. It's a through the ice test. They ask you questions. There's a safety rope and divers. You have to answer them and not panic. At first you panic. You go through and you panic. Everybody panics. And then you have to crawl out. And then you can't run. You can stand up after a few yards, and then you have to walk back to your backpack, undress wet, put dry clothes on, and run around. Because you could fall through the ice, or a snowmobile could go through, and then you might have to help people. So even the tests are real. This is making water. Okay, of course. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, ultimate power. Like, you need to drink, and water will freeze. So you need to have strategies to not just make water to drink, but to keep yourself clean. Infections, rashes, you're up there long enough. How do you take a shower in the Arctic? You know what these are? These are military rations. They're caribou parts caught in the summer, fermented under rock. They mark them from a distance by piles of rocks, cairns, we can call them that. And then they're emergency food supplies. They remember where they are because they know how to read the snow and they know how to read the distances and the direction of the wind. This is tunneling. There's a lot of metaphors here, right? Tunneling, survival shelters. Like if you get yourself out of the wind, this might go from minus 60 to minus 30. And you can keep yourself warm with a candle. This is search and rescue training, which is totally real. Clyde River. This is on the east side of Baffin Island. Polar bear hunting, which is not illegal. You need a permit to do it. This is some of the Inuit soldiers I was with. And, you know, people use polar bears, including, and I'm not throwing shade in environmental groups, but they use the polar bear all the time. And that's not necessarily the gauge or the ruler with which we measure climate change. It's misused a lot of times. And it creates a lot of facts, or there's no facts missing when they do that. This is fishing through the ice with nets, pulling up Arctic char, which is kind of like a salmon of the Arctic. Okay. This is oil production. Each seal, 40 liters, give or take. And then you can use the skin, the fur to make gloves, hats, the meat you can eat. But oil production's been happening in the Arctic way before industry came along. I always we think we're in these advanced societies where we've invented all this stuff before anyone. They had to learn this and created out of nothing for survival, and over centuries create systems with which they survive and live in tune with nature. So this is a small holding area for fishing in the summer, and there always has been a summer in the Arctic, especially sort of in that subarctic or right around the Arctic Circle. And those are Arctic char. This is in a river. It's the top northwest corner of Hudson's Bay. And there is a bigger version of those rocks. And that's a fishing net. They open the front, the fish swim in the deeper water, and they close the rocks, and they go and they collect all the fish. I'm simplifying it, but that's what it is. Those are pieces of icebergs. This is not far from Nauyat, which used to be called Repulse Bay, a whaling area. And when you catch fish, that's dog food for your hunting dogs. When I took this photograph, I was looking at it, and I just thought it was very interesting because it just showed sort of the raw brutality of being on the tundra in the summer. And you're like, whoa, what the hell's going on? It's just, obviously this is a caribou. They hunted it, and they've, depending on how sensitive to words you are, not, they butchered it or they processed it. But when I stood there looking at this, one of my Inuit friends kept and said, you know what this is? That's the cutting board. That's our deli. And it's in a refrigerator. This is the meat department. But we like, especially in colonial times, we like to think of it as something else. That's the cutting board. That's the meat. It's processed. And because of the ambient temperature, the meat doesn't go bad. Okay? And climate change is going to change an indigenous technology that's been around, living at one with nature eventually with the change of temperature. So that's processing a caribou that got hunted. I think we walked 10 miles for that, back and forth. Sorry, there's a... Oop, no, never mind. So that's the tundra, treeless, because of the permafrost in the ground. So they cut the animal in half and processed it. You got to look, but over here, they took the tendons and made straps, and then they cut the fur off and made a backpack. And they made 2 backpacks to carry the meat back. This is way more exciting, no offense to Apple, but way more interesting than, an Apple iPhone's not going to save you in the Arctic. So, and this is about natural resources, right? So, and colonialization, right? So, obviously, all the Inuit I'm with have snowmobiles and motorboats and rifles. Those are not, traditional things, right? They came from somewhere. So, on the left, we have jerry cans with gas for the motorboats. And on the right, we have a caribou head, which you can't really eat anything off of. But you know what that is? That's a drying rack for sushi. Right? But that's what it is. Everything gets used. Nothing gets thrown away. But things are changing, right? People are saying things. People are doing things. People are intoning things. So I started the project off as a Guggenheim Fellowship. I went to my first trip on my own. This particular project, so I've been working in the Arctic 30 years, and this particular project started around 2015. Nat Geo licensed the whole project, and then it became like a full-blown 5-year project. And then I've been licensing the work around, and now I'm on a contract with Bloomberg Opinion. So this is some of the work I've done with Bloomberg. It's a really great series you should take a look at. So now you're starting to see like firing ranges with not just targets, but this, This is in Canada. This is Resolute Bay. It's a nice brisk day, minus 69, loading into an airplane. And there's things like this, like training for combat, right? And they could be training for winter warfare anywhere, but like, if I want to defeat you, I'll just rip your tent up and you die. It doesn't matter. I don't have to shoot you. I just sneak up and throw your tent away. Then you'll die, or take away your fire and all your water will freeze. Like, nature can be used in that way, right? So I just think this is it just makes you ask questions. This is Anuga. So when soldiers from the South or from the Arctic go up north, the Inuit soldiers train them, and it's almost always in survival. So it's very basic. You know what this is? This is a Cliff Bar maker. It's an Arctic char chopped up with a cleaver, right? The ice is a cutting board, right? And I take those little pieces of Arctic char full of hot oil that burns really hot in your stomach, like peanuts. And that is Arctic power bars. Because the oil, you will warm up more from when you eat. That's why seals, everything has high fat. It burns hotter inside you. Okay? So this is de-icing a plane with a broom. This is a special company that flies to the Antarctic as well. There's a whole special kind of flying with skis. You can see the back wheel there for flying around the Arctic. And a lot of scientists can't go anywhere without the military. That's who does all the flights. So there is a relationship there that's always been there. And these are the things you're starting to see up there, like, you got the Cometic, which has now been made out of wood with a lot of oil, U.S. flags popping up in places. This is in Resolute. Resolute's like right in the middle of that archipelago I showed you earlier. But while I was working on this project, my editor's like, what's going on in the other part of the Arctic? And we don't always think about that as the Arctic. People are like, oh, where do you stay in the Arctic? Well, I'm in Finland. I don't know. I rent a Volvo and go to yoga class and have a cappuccino because those countries aren't as high up as Canada, but they're in the Arctic. But you're starting to see this. And this is before the invasion I started this part of the project. So this is in Finland. Finland was always on their own. And at the end of the Cold War, a lot of countries like the Netherlands, like, oh, we don't need these tanks anymore. Finland's like, we'll buy those. We'll buy those. And now they have the largest artillery range in all of Western Europe. And they were kind of on their own because Russia's like, hey, no NATO on our border. So they've had this incredible, I say it's incredible because to organize this sort of it's mandatory military service. And I think they have upward of close to almost 1 million reservists. Like there's like a signal that goes on the radio and everybody's got their guns and uniforms at home kind of thing. This is Finnish soldiers training U.S. soldiers how to ski. Now, when we think about like, oh, could there be a war in the Arctic? Actually, there was in 1939. It's called the Winter War when the Soviet Union invaded Finland to annex land, which they did annex the land and still have. So this is obstacle courses with U.S. and Finnish soldiers. These are U.S. Marines training in Norway through the ice. And it's interesting. Remember, I talk about looking at materials? Like his backpack is beige. Like the U.S. is transitioning from desert wars to other kinds of wars, right? And they're struggling in it a little bit. This is Norwegians training Swedes in this important part of Sweden called Norrbotten. It's the part you could invade through to get through to the bottom of Sweden and Norway, Oslo and Stockholm. They're just having mass in front of a tank. And it's about imitating nature, right? It's how many people here had seen John Carpenter's The Thing? You should, okay, it's a horror movie and science fiction. I get it. But I say it's the first science fiction movie about climate change. If you watch it, the creature, the more they use flamethrowers, the worse it gets. So the hotter they make it. And there's a lot of symbolism with oil in it. By the way, if you like Kurt Russell, he's like in his 20s hot phase, actually, in that movie. He's the hot helicopter pilot. But it's a really fascinating movie, and I think that's what horror and science fiction does. I come back to the word imagination. Imagination helps us see, you know. And I think that's a part of journalism that's really, really important right now. So this is camouflage tanks. This is all along the Russian border. This is a HIMARS. We didn't know what a HIMARS was really till the Ukraine war, right? So, but the Finns have had it for a long time. But they just, all the pictures almost seem surreal because like, what is that? What's going on in the Arctic? And also Finland does have trees in the Arctic Circle because they have a unique weather system that allows it. There was a lot of war in Norway, and they can get up to several hundred calls a year for unexploded bombs in the Second World War. So these are Norwegian Navy divers training to look for unexploded bombs. So I'm above the water, it's snowing, and my flash is lighting the snow, if you're wondering what's going on there. Something that doesn't get often talked about in these lectures, because I think there's this illusion that photographers go on their own and suddenly they got these pictures that show up, are photo editors. On this particular project, I had a very long and still a great relationship with Sadie Quarrier. She's my photo editor on this. And she used to send me pictures of her eyes with blood leaking out of her eyes because I sent her like a hard drive would be 15,000 pictures from some place no one's ever been. Because I would land and be like, no one's ever been here. I'm like, oh my God, the pressure's on, you know. But I think she's looked at over 150,000 raw files. So, and then it's important. It's not just about picking the best photos, but it's also giving feedback like that last trip was good and you got close with this photo. Next one you go out, you know, can you try changing this or doing this better? And so this is the layout room for the magazine at National Geographic. And so these are just some selects of, you know, different kinds of photos. Remember the two guys skinning the caribou? Well, I like that photo, but I also like this photo. But it's kind of looks like the same picture. So she's like, look, you're doing two people bent over all the time. Like, I know this is your aesthetic now. So, you know, different, you know, having options for edits, right? I think photo editing doesn't get talked about enough, and it's one of the most important parts of photojournalism. Here's some sample spreads because I think seeing the photographs in context is important. So this was that piece that published in National Geographic. And it's incredible in National Geographic. I mean, the reach is in the millions, right? So caption up in the corner, these are U.S. troops training to learn how to ski. This is the aftermath of the ski lesson. No, this is they're actually it's pretty exhausting because you're outside in the cold, inside in the heat, outside in the cold, inside in the heat. I think they're learning about avalanche training here. And here's just a little shout out to the little aesthetics in photo editing that I think are important. Like, so you have like the light of the flare, you know, almost like echoing and lighting the picture underneath. These are just small aesthetics, but that's not all photo editing is. Photo editing is also, they are your ambassadors to the rest of the sort of the newsroom and the publisher. And they're like, well, we don't like it. We like this photo. And they're like, yes, but that doesn't work, you know, or these are the things you got to think about if we're going to publish those photos together. And then this is online on the desktop. So large and small, warm and cool. These are all the kinds of, these are just small surface aesthetics. I can't get into it too much, right? Okay. a lot and a few. Okay. Sea from below, air from above. These are all the little things photo editors are looking at. That sometimes it's happening in the back of my photo brain, and photo editors are like kind of like my therapists who like, oh, this is what you're doing. I'm like, oh, that's what I was thinking. You know, if you want to see, so the Bloomberg series, I can't show it all. If you want to take a picture of this, it's free, especially if you're California salmon. Read that red alert for America's wild fishery. It'll give you a real wake-up call of what's happening to the fishery here in the United States. Because that East Coast collapse is now kind of in a five-alarm fire up in Alaska. And it's a really serious thing. And what some of the people are doing up there, some of the different, when I say people, like even companies and organizations, could be a real important sort of thing that could affect the whole salmon fishery in the entire West Coast. Just so you know, like, Alaska is the largest fishery in America. Like, there's no farm fishing allowed, which I think is good, but there's a lot of things happening there that you should know about. And almost all the fish for the filet-o-fish from McDonald's comes from up there, by the way. Whoa. The oil, they're all good, but the oil and the fishing one's good. Oh, what the hell's going on here? Clickety click here. Hey, reading. There's so many great books out there. I love books. This is a fantastic book. Margaret Atwood wrote the intro in the new edition. It's about the Franklin expedition, and she talks about two things in the beginning, which I think is important. Two technologies went up with that crew. One was tinned food. So first time they could like bring lots of food and go on a long expedition. Soldered with lead. Not so good. Also photography, but they never found the camera. So we can only imagine what happened to them up there. That's a fantastic book. And these are 4 good books. The one on the right is a real academic, heavy, boring for some people. Not me. Look at the Post-it notes up there and the bookmarks. But that 2050 book is a nice short read. And it'll give you an idea up to 2050, all the things are kind of unfolding and really compressed. The Revenge of Geography is good. If you want to read a little deeper, again, deep kind of nerd warning, that anything with Whitney Lackenbauer is really good. That historical sort of the Canadian military and Indigenous people, because that's been a relationship that's happened for a long time, actually. So now we're at the questions. See, Ken, 38 minutes, 7 minutes early, man. More time for questions. Some people ask questions out in the hall, and I'll just answer some of those quick before me and Ken start talking. Someone asked about polar bears. A polar bear will kill you with maximum violence like that. They're beautiful. They're cute. I've seen some from boats like 15, 20 feet away that tried attacking the boat. They're from here to the chair. Black bears and brown bears about this big. They're like giant fat dogs. Polar bear will kill you fast. And I have seen them, but you don't see them very often. You'll see ravens way more. And I think it's incredible how manufactured visuals about what the Arctic really is becomes the polar bear, where you'll see ravens way more. And actually, smartest bird in the world, biggest brain, fascinating. And polar bear at least got all the fur. Ravens, like, how the hell do you survive up here? You're squawking and those little legs of yours, but nearly in every town, you won't just see them flying randomly in the middle of above the North Pole, but you'll see them in almost every town. And they're incredible to watch how smart they are. So that's polar bears. So I think we'll now move over here, turn the timer off. So I did not turn into one of those lecturers who don't stop talking.
Very good, Louie. We were talking earlier, we had George Tice, the photographer, come, who passed away, I think, maybe last week, a week and a half ago. Amazing photographer. And he came to do a lecture, and George said, I'm just going to do a very short lecture. I'm like, oh, okay. And I think after 2 hours, he went through every single girlfriend he had in his entire life. It was pretty incredible. And everyone just sat there, but it was a little bit too long. So I warned Louie, and you did. You're going to win the award.
2 mics here. I've already got this one, so I'm just going to put this one here. Okay. I only mentioned my wife. That's it. Who taught me how to ride horses? If you don't ride horses, Chloe. They're amazing. Yeah, Chloe.
Chloe, great photo editor at the Washington Post.
Yes.
I've worked with her numerous times.
And she's my best friend.
Yeah. So one of my questions is, I love that opening picture of like the frozen shutter. So you haven't really talked about, yeah, it's 30 below, 60 below. How do you take pictures? How do you do you keep the cameras warm? What do you do? Under
So
your arm, like the
no,
Polaroid, the old days of the Polaroid?
there were times where, and even when I think I know what I'm doing, when you're in the field like that, it's not for everybody, and that's no shade on anybody. But I just grew up with my dad, like in the bush. Like when I was a kid, my dad was like, I think it was November, it's been snowing, duck hunting, the dogs licking me. My dad goes, "Do you know how cold that water is?" I'm like, "No." And he pushed me in and he says, "Now you know not to fall in the lake." And he made me walk around the whole day wet from my waist down. And I'm telling you, I was like, I don't know, I was 9. I was just like, wow, this is a great trip you took me on today. It's okay. When I got home, I told my mother, and he slept in the spare room that night. Strategies of an Italian kid, immigrant kid.
I like it.
No, but in all seriousness, I train all the writers and reporters I take with me because I've been working up there for a long time. And it could be simple, like this is before we can get the cameras. If you lose your glove, you lose your hand. Like whether it's training or a real war, use your gloves, you're dead. If you have a hole in your boot, you're dead. I mean, it happens that fast. If you don't pull your mask over your cheekbone, you put your goggles in the snowmobile, you'll get there and you have a little black mark. You'll have frostbite on your face. I remember once, sorry, I laughed because he recovered, but we got on a plane and we were picking up soldiers that had landed in all these Inuit communities, and the trainers were getting on, and one guy's nose was black because he was snowmobiling and it's stinging, and you're like, I don't know what that is. I mean, I wasn't saying that, but he got on and all the guys kind of joked, but it wasn't funny because it's like, that's how fast. I think one day ice from your vapor of your mouth is coming up, and you see pictures where there's ice on people's eyelashes, and I was getting angry and I was wiping it off to take pictures, and I scratched my cornea. And my cornea got infected. Well, now my eye's infected. Now the wind's blowing on it. Now it's inflamed. So I had this giant. I look like the pirate of the north. The medics made an eye patch for me, and I had to use my other eye for the first time, and it was really hard. It was very, very hard. So with cameras, I just gonna say what models I use. I use a Nikon D800 because it's like a digital tank. And it has a little pop-up flash. And I like flash, but that little pop-up flash, even knows about cameras, it's like, what's this stupid little amateur flash on top? Well, I started using it, and I would use my fingers in front of it, and a lot of those pictures have little bursts of flash that you don't know. And I have about 10 batteries inside my coat, 10 camera batteries. And there'll be times where I snowmobile somewhere, and you're just maybe not noticing, and half your goggles frozen. It's 2.5 hours. You're following the Inuit elder to the food stock somewhere out on the land. It's kind of humorous, actually. You get out there and you get out, you get your cameras out. You're like, oh my God, this scene's and the cameras, you're pressing the button, nothing's happening. It just froze, So I usually carry a camera body inside my parka. And this is when you should own a Canada Goose parka. If you have one, that's okay. You're supporting the Canadian economy. But I have the super, you could never wear it unless it's -50 kind of parka. You have snow pants on. There's a video somewhere where Nat Geo sped up like dun, 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 with this music, and I'm getting dressed. It takes like 50. Sometimes I look out the window, I'm like, oh, look at that picture out there. They're doing this thing. I go to the change room and like they're gone because it took me almost 15, 20 minutes to get dressed. And you wear special boots. They're mucklucks. Special boots that have 3 layers of insoles that pull the sweat off your feet, and the ice forms in the bottom of your boot, and you melt it later on when you come back in. Because sweat can kill you. So if you start doing a lot of physical stuff, I will take my coat off. It's -30, but if you're moving, your body's like a little an engine, right? And you can get hot. If you sweat, you can get hypothermia. Like all these things, it's nonstop. So this is a place where eating French fries, you could just eat. I mean, it's probably bad for your heart. Melanie, he ate no French fries at the DNC, RNC, I swear. He's eating tofu.
I did not have French fries at the RNC.
There are no donuts involved in the making of this production. But, peanuts, peanut butter, like little packets of peanut butter. You want things that burn hot, high fat fish, salmon, whatever you can get. So I remember we were out somewhere at the top of Cornwallis Island. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. It was way up there. It was minus 60 something. Bad. It was bad. And we stopped to warm up, and we pulled out some little Coleman ovens and we're heating the water up. And a couple of soldiers in the South pulled out their like Cliff Bars and almost broke their teeth. I mean, the things were like eating rocks. And you know what the Inuit did? They out of their pocket, they just pulled out half a frozen fish and just took a machete and just started shaving it off and started panning. That's the power bar. You just put it in your mouth. It melts right away. You have to like fish. And it's like instant. It heats you up because it's like putting literally oil inside you. And that burns, right? So, once we were watching, it's like half a caribou head comes. I mean, they're just ribs. And it's funny for us, right? But I think that's what Franklin thought. The British Empire thought we're going to go up there and, we're going to make a route so we can go pillage India even more. And they went up into Canada's north, and like nature said, hey, you think you're going to do that here? We have people here who've learned how to do it, right? And you're going to all die. And that's what happened. They all died.
So let me ask about access. We know in
Yep.
this era right now, getting access is very, very difficult. There's, if you want to go photograph on the border, they're going to stick you with public information officer who's going to let you only see what they want you to see.
Yep.
And you're shooting the military. What's the access like? Are they asking to see your photographs? Are they not letting you see certain things? Can you talk a little bit about the
Okay,
access
yeah. So I
issue?
think this is an important question, and I would say let's back up a little, say to like the war in Afghanistan and Iraq with the whole embed system. I mean, embeds, whether they call that or not, these things have kind of been around all the time. And there are different experiences with different people at different phases of the war where they're like, don't let them see anything, to we don't even care. Can you please cover the war? Like, these are the phases Iraq and Afghanistan went through. And like, say, Guantanamo Bay, when you go to Guantanamo Bay, I've been there like 8 times. You take photos all day, and there's some rules, lots of rules, and there's like 5 people following you around. You can't talk to the detainees. So sometimes you're walking around. There's only like 24, even less left. When I went there, it was like 400. And they would talk to you, and you can't talk to them. Some of them don't understand who you are and why you're there. You can't tell them. So you're photographing. At the end of the day, you meet with these military officials. I thought they're all in the CIA or something. They take your memory card, put it in the computer, and they start going through it with you. And then there are things that they would delete. And I think that there were some ones that I didn't mind, like showing the doors and the locks, the kind of locks they had, or like how far the wall and the tower was to the water, like to make a prison break, stuff like that. But then they didn't want detainees' faces showing. But I always feel like in the history of photography, and especially I think in my abilities, it kind of like challenges you to find new ways of taking things. And then later on, when they're changing the rules, that you figured out there's holes, and there's holes in everything. There's holes in things to find how to take photos that are even more interesting. So I created a publication with all the documents, with all the deleted files, like the file numbers. They list them all. Because I thought, this is a way of understanding what's going on. And in a way, if you read Plato, The Allegory of the Cave, does everybody know what the Allegory of the Cave is? Basically it's, if you look at something long enough, right, you might start believing it's real. That's kind of what this administration right now is trying to pull on everybody. But, it's this allegory, these guys in a cave who are chained, have to look at these shadows. They start thinking the shadows are the real thing and not the people making the shadows. That's the allegory of the cave. So I started applying that to shadows at Guantanamo Bay. And it turned into this whole thing that revealed things that they didn't understand. And then they made rules so you couldn't photograph like that. But then I published all these documents that talk about a time where they weren't allowing us to see photos, and that digital photos in a digital age, you could delete, but you can't delete film. And that those file numbers tell us something, that digital photography is math. It's computation. They're numbers. The picture is an illusion. Behind that is numbers, is code, right? And I thought the code is the government doesn't want us to see something. And if you're imaginative enough as a journalist, you can make publications like that. And they're like, oh, I thought this was just, don't let them take a picture of the face. But I don't care about the face. I want to talk about policy. And there's always room for that. So with the Arctic, what happened is the Canadian military, no photographer wanted to go up there, actually. So the Canadian military, I covered Afghanistan, and one of the basic things, I think this isn't always, sometimes there are journalists who are really good and some that aren't really good. And they go in the field and they can't make a tent. They can't survive. They can't hike 10 miles. There are actual instances where, yes, the military tries to control what you do. But in Afghanistan, I was like, I went hunting with my dad and he pushed me in the lake. I can walk 40 miles. Let's go. And I think over time, I had a reputation where if I went out with them, they wouldn't have to worry about me. So my public affairs officer got transferred to Joint Task Force North, which was this new command in the Canadian Arctic after the Russian submarine flag planting situation. She went to her commanding officer and said, hey, I want to start an embed program. And he goes, no way we're having media up here. The last thing we need is like them photographing and reporting on us and like quoting us about things and making us look bad. She said, look, let me bring one guy up here. We'll try him out. And if you don't like it, then we won't do it. And he goes, yeah, he won't survive in the Arctic. So she called me up and said, Louie, do you want to come and like be the guinea pig for the Arctic program? And I said, sure. And I'll be honest, sometimes you come along where the military is under duress. Like the government's like, we don't need to do anything over there. And they're like, no, but really there's a thing happening here. And so you go up there, and I'm not doing anyone a favor, but I really felt like we didn't start talking about up here. There's no use in building a military base up there if the permafrost melts and the base sinks into the permafrost after they spend, $100 million of your money, or a port or a deep port. So I started photographing up there, and I think policymakers were like, we had no idea this is what it looked like. I had no idea about Inuit technologies. I'd never thought of it like that. So in a lot of ways, at least with the Canadians, it went really well. The US, no one cared to cover Alaska at all. So I went up there, and sometimes, again, I make requests for things and they think it's this and it's really that. And like the parachutes, they think I'm photographing the parachutist, but I'm really photographing the mountain with the parachutes in front of it. I'm looking for things that they don't care about or aren't thinking about. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to the secret NORAD radar site in Greenland because they're not going to let me go. They're not going to let me photograph nuclear weapons. I mean, there are things they're not letting me on the submarine, but at least we're seeing something. And what I would argue is this. There is a lot of criticism that can be wielded at the embed system from covering the Middle East. But any journalist in this room, go apply for an embed in Syria right now and see if there's any access, because the embed system's gone. There is no access. Do we know what what US soldiers are doing in the Middle East right now? Do we have access to bases, all these sort of lily pad sites all over the place? We don't. It's all secret, right? Journalists aren't allowed at all anymore. So Guantanamo Bay, we just can't go anymore at all. There's just, I think the detainees understand who journalists are and they don't want their photos taken. I think one day I was there and there was a detainees came out to me and started saying hello. He's like a former member of Al-Qaeda. I knew what prisoner he was, and I thought, I really would like to talk to this guy just because I'd like to collect information and report on it, right? But I couldn't. But, I think that people think the war in Afghanistan is over. Well, I'd argue that it's not. First of all, for the veterans who are at home suffering from all the PTSD and other injuries, but also Guantanamo Bay, which is a recruiting poster for terrorists. But the way what's happened there and the narrative around that. So,
let me ask one more question, and then we'll get some questions from the audience. Editing. Wow. I mean, I know as a photographer, you go out and you photograph, you have your own vision. I remember stories about Eugene Smith working at Life magazine and would get in huge fights with his editors because he would say, they're in some building in New York City on the 8th floor, and I go out into the field and photograph and come back, and they think they know the story, but what they know about the New York City subway, what do they know about the stories I'm doing? He'd get in big fights. I think once he threatened to commit suicide unless, they liked his edit. So how is it, working with Geographic, you've shot how many thousands pictures?
Well, the North American Arctic, so not counting the Nordic countries, that's 150,000. Well, it's actually more now because Bloomberg started this whole thing. I think I'm over 200,000 pictures.
200,000 pictures. Okay.
Raw files.
That's good. My students, I send them out, they come back with 25 pictures. So you're a good example.
Wow.
For my students, I want you to go out and shoot 200 pictures. We'll keep it low. So I know as a photographer, you have your own vision. You have certain pictures you think tell the story, but also show your practice as a photographer, your skill as a photographer. And then you go into the edit and geographic, I don't know, how many pictures do they use? 25?
Well, in print, it was 11 in the magazine.
11 pictures.
And then maybe 20 online, something like that.
Yeah. So do you push back? Did you push back? Do you just go along with it because they're paying you a lot of money and sending you there? Or
so
did you like their edit? Or do you,
Yeah, so I would say this is a really good question because I would say this. It's funny how...
And you're not a quiet guy.
I'm not a quiet guy. I'm going to stereotype, but it's okay because I'm Italian.
I was going to say that, but I'm glad you did.
Sometimes I behave some way and then all those stereotypes. And I look at my wife, she's from the Midwest, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. It's my Italian side's boiling. I want to, wave my hands around, which I do. Anyway, so photo editing is very, during the era of canceling, which I guess might still exist, it's funny how single photographers would get taken out. And sometimes, especially in history, like he went up there and was colonial and he went up there and he parachuted in, he did all these things and took these photos. And it's like, if you read histories, like say with David Douglas Duncan, I did a research project. If you don't know who he is, he was a photographer who started his career in the Second World War as a Marine. And then he started working for Life magazine. And he's most famous for his coverage of the Korean War, I think, which are some of the incredible frontline combat photos. And he did many other things. One of his first assignments was of course, it was after the war. He covered Israel-Palestine, like right in the beginning, right? And so the story publishes, and if you look at his cables, I went to Harry Ransom Center at UT Austin, you can read his notes, and he's sending like, I quit. How dare you publish my photographs? Because back then, unlike now with digital, you would send your film back to a lab somewhere, and you'd still be out in the field. They would publish the film. You're not even there. And they would be like, hey, this is the edit. Photo editors and other editors, they're photo editors. Like some of the most important photo editors were women who would do the real edit. And then they were called negative editors, and they would give it up to other men who would take the credit for the photo edit. These are the things I discovered. So there's in the fabrication of the edit, the cropping. And so David Douglas Duncan, I said, I quit. You mentioned Palestinians once and Israelis 50 times. Like this is not a balanced story. And so these conflicts, I think, still happen. Maybe not in that form, but with digital, a little different. So what happened with this is growing up as a punk rock kid who questions Generation X, it's warfare in every conversation. I start my projects now on my own. And like this, I started on my own. I got a Guggenheim Fellowship, but they aren't expensive. There's some places like to fly to Resolute, it could be $8,000 return. Boom, fifth year grants like out the window. So you need to raise money. Like Pulitzer Center, Nat Geo put in so I licensed it to them. So I own all my copyright. That's important. And I can sign deals where they can use it within their organization for a certain amount of time. And I'll be honest, I got to work with Sadie Courier, who, if you don't know who she is, she's a pretty remarkable photo editor and a really nice person. And at the time, Sarah Lean, who is also a veteran, the last of that kind of generation at the magazine, who was a photographer and became the director of photography. And I really felt like, and I think you're a really good photographer, you say, look, these are the things I wish I could fix. There's some of these things I'd been, I don't know, almost 30 years in my career, little things like cutting, not always, but an example, cutting a foot off all the time, or the angle, or how I use lenses, or how I approach a scene and how I photograph it in many different ways, where I put myself in weight and how I think. So they started telling me things, and I wrote them down on cue cards, and I have them in my pocket, like intimate and epic. I want the epic and I want the intimate, because you're up there sleep deprived, you're at 50% mental capacity, and you're like, oh, let me just get the pictures. And you get back, you're like, poof, these suck. But I just thought, I went in with what I thought was great stuff. I went into the meeting for the pitch, and Sarah Lean said, you have to do all this over again. And here I am, like minus 50, 10 trips in. I'm like, yes, I will do it all. Because Sadie said, say yes. Say yes. And then Sarah took off her glasses. I just bought a brand new laptop. I'm freelance. And she goes, this on my screen. She's like hitting it. I'm like, oh my God, she's going to break my screen. I'm like, yes, great. I'll do that. And she was, really, it's not like this anymore at Nat Geo. Things have changed. But it was like, you're doing that again and again and again. I think that parachute picture, I did 6 trips to get that parachute picture. And I don't use long lenses, but that's a 300 millimeter lens because 400 parachutists are coming down on top of you. If you use a wide lens, there's like, oh, there's one here and one down there, you know? So you start learning your tools, and you need to spend, I think I would spend like 8 weeks in one place in the Arctic going outside every day for 9 hours, like street photography in minus 70, you know? And you have to be good at building relationships. And I send hard drives to Sadie. And this is where the difference comes in with editing. Now I will edit 20, 30 photos of, or if it's less, 10 or sometimes 60 of a place I go to. And there'll be a folder of all my raw files and a folder of selects. So they'll be like, hey, these are some things Louie's thinking about, rough captions. And it goes through a system and they code every photograph. It's all searchable. You're not allowed to delete even the accidental picture you take with your elbow of your foot. You know, nothing. It's a rule at Nat Geo, no deleting photos. They wanted to be able to see exactly how you do everything. So you send it in, and then I would get notes back like, this thing you're doing is great, or this is exciting. You completely, the word fail was never used, but this, I'm not so interested in this. I mean, they said, you give me 8 selects of that scene. Like, I don't like it. It's, you know, so I would get really good notes. And then we would sit down at times in the 5 years and we would look at edits. And they'd be like, this is great, or this is new, or I want you to pursue this. Can you go back there? And that's when those budgets were good. I think I must have raised, and I say raised because I had to get grants, licensing fees. I had to raise like probably over $200,000 to do that first part of the project. And a lot of that is airfare. I think I flew 4 times around the earth with like flights. And I traveled by foot, snowmobile, ATV, walking, hiking, canoeing, snowmobiling, pickup trucks, trains. I mean, every form of travel I used in that Arctic project. I did not parachute, thank God. But to get to the submarine, took me 5 days and 5 airplanes. We landed with a small prop plane on the ice sheet on a floating ice base. I had 5 hours to take those pictures. And I thought, man, if I have to like stand on my head, swim underwater on the ice to get a photo from this scene, I'm going to work it out. And when you're under that kind of pressure, when you have those kinds of coaches and you buy into the photo edit, like those kinds of photo editors, especially Sarah Lean, who's a photographer, you learn how to start photographing to an edit. And I think that that is really crucial. I think the era you're talking about sounded like the Eugene Smith. Those days were really terrible, probably. There's still photographers who fight photo editors. In that case, yeah, there are a couple of things you disagreed about. But after I got done 50,000, all that travel, it's just publish it kind of thing. So,
well, I'm glad your father pushed you into the water because it made you tough.
There are other things he did that were. I'll tell you the kind of guy he was. He's up there like Italian, like don't dishonor the whole family in front of this crowd. But he would have been the kind of guy who would have cut a hole in his mask during the pandemic to smoke cigarettes. That's what he was, that guy. He would be on the snowmobile, not behind the screen, above it with a smoke hanging out, snowmobiling while I'm like right with my face in the back of his snowsuit, like I'm going to die. You know, he was that guy. He was just, he grew up in the war. And if you couldn't fish or hunt, you didn't eat. Slingshots hunting for birds. That's how you ate. Because what the Nazis didn't take, the partisans took. They took all the food. So you survived because you had to. So and here I am, a kid going, oh, he's teaching me hunting. He's like this war survival training.
That's why you brought those little sandwiches to the convention to feed
I did.
us, right?
You know, I just got to say, they were, I went to a special bakery to get the right bread. It was arugula with German mustard and prosciutto. And that was Parma prosciutto, the imported one, I want to say. Ken's having like,
it's really good.
Ken is having like premier prosciutto sandwiches at the RNC and DNC.
That's right.
Anyway.
Thank you. Let's open up for some questions. I think there's a microphone going around. Sydney? Why don't you take this?
Hello. So I'm curious about like your subjective experience as a human being, like being in an extreme like that, and maybe how that impacts the photos that you take.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks. That's a good question. I would say the majority of the Arctic is uninhabited. And I would say that from the tip of South America to the top of Canada is indigenous land. So whether I'm in Toronto or New York or up there, right now we're on indigenous land, originally indigenous land, colonialized land. And as a kid, you're at the bus stop in Toronto, and it's by Lake Ontario. It's not Arctic, but it's -20. Sort of like, as I got older, it's like, what's our favorite sport? We bolt pieces of metal to shoes, and we go on some ice and take a piece of wood, and we hit a piece of rubber at each other. Hockey. Okay. We put pieces of wood on, go to the top of a hill, and then fly down that hill as fast as we can. And then we go and do it in the Olympics, skiing. I think we just do all these, like, skating. There's all these winter things we do. Ice fishing. I love ice fishing. And I think that what I learned from my father is that nature is something you respect. I think when my father came from Italy, he just thought practically, like, who are the best hunters and anglers I can learn from? And he thought indigenous people. So he went to find indigenous communities, to find people to make friends with, to go hunting and fishing with them. And I remember we went hunting as a kid, and after they killed an animal, there was an entire ritual around it, not just to just start skinning it and take it, but there's an entire ritual around it, sort of the whole idea of respecting nature. And I think learning my father taught me how to drink out of swamps, how to find springs. I was just thinking, like, wow, this is cool, but this is all out of survival from war. So I didn't understand this as a kid. It took me many decades to understand what that photo I showed when I opened up really meant. And I think, as we think about our future on this planet, what we got to think about is how we work with a planet that will survive without us to preserve the environment that we need to survive on this planet. So I think my perspective is, I've covered real wars, and I've seen what people are capable of. And I've also seen great human moments where people do really kind things. And I think that it's very easy in our own little personal moments to forget what is coming related to climate change. Like, look at Los Angeles. That's not the worst. When you go to the Arctic shows you what is power. Like, we can't beat a tidal wave or lightning, right? We can't beat that, but those things can beat us. And I think LA and other fires in Europe and other things been going on are a warning of what's coming. Now we got to imagine, especially coastal cities like here, that ice cap on Greenland. If that all melts, there's various numbers thrown around, several feet of rising waters, permanent, by the way. So we got to start imagining a future like that. And I think that my dad pushing me in the water is him teaching me that that thing can hurt you. And if you don't understand it, then you won't understand how it can hurt you and how you need to respect it and think about it. So temperature is a thing. That's what my dad was teaching me. And elements. He only went to grade 4. This is the incredible thing. Grade 4. Did pretty good.
Other questions people might have? John in the back? Yeah.
Yeah, they're recording it, so
People can hear you.
Great. It's on the record. I'm wondering how you think about impact, especially in the sense of, I mean, just with the history of photography. You mentioned a few minutes ago going to places that obviously most of us in this room are never going to go to, but places that very few humans have ever gone to. And thinking about that with the history of photography, like, increasing technology, especially from the French, and that being used in the French colonial expedition in Egypt to take photos of hieroglyphics, for example, and the kind of correlation between knowledge and power, and the way that going to places that are not often traveled to, photographing them. You take those photos, but then in 50 years, or kind of the legacy of studying a place, I just wonder if you think about that, or if when you're there, you're like, I just need to get the photo.
No, I if I go into a community, I always go and don't take photos on my first trip. I contact the local community leaders if it's an indigenous community. I meet with them, and the most valuable thing in photography, I think, is listening. Like, never mind the lens and the seeing part. And first of all, I want to make sure I'm welcome there. And I would say that I have multiple communities in the north who ask me to come back. They don't want just one article. There's places where there is no journalism, There's ways of recording histories, but I think that outside threats or the needs for an economy or jobs up there is really key. And I think that even if there are local journalists, they need journalists from Washington, D.C. and Ottawa and Oslo. They need those leaders to listen to them up there because, if you read that piece on the salmon, that piece really, when I went up there, I didn't realize how in trouble the salmon fishery is and how there are many illusions created to think that there isn't. Okay. There's forms of fishing that have something called bycatch. Bycatch is you take a net, okay, and you do a trawler, you go those big nets, and you catch a bunch of fish. They're fish you want, turbot, salmon, and everything else you catch, you throw away dead. Millions of pounds. At times, whales, sharks, other things. It scrapes the bottom of the ocean sometimes. Very destructive. So I think when we think of the colonial era, I think that, yes, I'm definitely never want to be associated with that. And I'm very aware of that. And I do a lot of reading of books of that history. And I'm always going up there because I think something's going wrong. And in this particular case, the way I work is I work long term. I'm in touch with people. I have there's a little Facebook group of Inuit friends I have who it's nothing really technical, but they measure ice. They draw on their screenshots of, I can't take my snowmobile here. There's actually a global problem going on right now, I think, with not just climate change, but some of these communities where there's industrialization. So with militarization comes industrialization, right? Well, the caribou don't go that way anymore. And there's a mine over here, or there's oil over there. I think mining and oil production is pretty important. How many people came here with cars? And if you came with a car that doesn't use oil, where that battery and all the metal on your car and our phones and this technology and computer. But I think, there's ways to do things that have less impact and ways to do things that have more impact. And so when it comes to photography, I think right now, it's okay. See, climate change alarm. Only kidding. It's okay. It's cool. Don't worry about it. It's totally cool. I think it's funny. I think it's important to study a history of what we do, like photographers, and to make sure that we don't follow in the same vein of people maybe who did things that cause harm. And a lot of times when I publish and or before I take photographs, I have discussions, especially with Indigenous people who have been treated very badly, especially in Canada. I mean, a lot of the Inuit in northern Canada who are in villages weren't from there. In the Cold War, they're like, we better put some Canadians. This is a true story. We better put some Canadians up there so we can say it's Canadian land. So they took groups, they fooled, this is a short form, compressed, groups of Inuit and said, you're going to go live up here. And they moved and force relocated them into places that they're not from. People died. Families were separated. It's a pretty dark history, decades ago. Obviously, we don't want to repeat that. And I do think that we are in an age where I'm lucky I grew up learning journalism and learning a code of ethics and a way of doing things where we don't inflict harm. And I do think that I've got feedback from the people, and I always ask the people I photograph, what do you think? How do you look at this? We also, you don't see a lot of is women in photographs. I think 40% of those Inuit units are women, which is pretty incredible. They're community-based. They're soldiers, but there's no combat happening with them. The only reason they carry a gun is for polar bears. So I think it's about recognizing the failures of maybe what you do, and everything, whether it's medicine or anything, has a failure from in the past. It's good to recognize and make sure we don't repeat that. And it's about community. It's about you asking this question, me being able to answer it, and us having a discussion about it. I think is important.
Hi. Could you talk more about maybe the relationship with the article's writer, the relationship between the photographs and the text, and the institution's point of view, and how that all plays out in terms of the kinds of images you end up taking or the ones that end up getting approved? And have you had conflicts around that or disagreements because you're on the ground and they're not, and the writer might not have been on the ground? Do they do it around your photographs, or do they have an idea and they tell you this is what they're looking for?
I think in this particular case, many of the writers I've worked with or organizations have never really covered this the way I have. I remember when I started this project, I make my editing prints at CVS, little 4x6 prints with a thumb drive. And I make a map. I make little documents, little records, right? And just you lay it out. And I started it, and Nat Geo used to have a process with which they would invite photographers in who's not work with them, and you come for lunch and you show a slideshow and be like, great, this is who you are. And I went in, and I'll be honest, I never really wanted to work with National Geographic because most of the photographs are taken of war and these things that they don't really publish. And they were mostly, I'd done some color work, but I'm like Mr. Black and White. And I was talking to David Burnett, and he's like, show them some black and white. Who cares? Show them some color and just keep going. And then I got invited to the annual seminar, which is coming up next week. And you go and you hear photographers talk and present their work, and explorers and scientists. It's like a week convention at National Geographic. And Sadie Quarrier came up to me back then before we started the project and said, so like, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm up in the Arctic. She goes, hey, let's go in the cafeteria. And I had like a handful of prints, a little map in my little bag with my camera. And so I pull them out and I lay out, I told her a story, and she said, did you show this to anybody? I said, no. She goes, don't show anybody. She goes, we're going to pitch this right away. And we started, I think I did 8 pitch meetings. We went from 1 photo editor to 3 to 5 to the director of photography, to the editor, to the publisher. And I think that a lot of people just, in this particular case, relied so much on my firsthand reporting because they just didn't know. I would say with Nat Geo, I had a writer. He went on 2 trips. I went on 40. He didn't have the budget. I did. I fundraised on the side, and I owned the work. So he did a okay job. I'd say Liam Denning, the writer I'm working with now at Bloomberg, is probably one of the most brilliant writers I've ever worked with. And just think of backgrounds that I think are really important. Almost all the writers I take, I have to train. From like the gloves you wear, I have a very specific way I do this thing. Wool is one of the it's technology from sheep. Right? Wool, it can be wet and it keeps you warm. There's these Air Force gloves, they're little wool gloves, they're $5. You can get packs of them online, even if you don't use Amazon. I'm careful what I say anymore and get attacked these days. But they're amazing. And wool is one of the best warming materials around. But I have to train. I have to help them buy things. I have to train them, and I still have to keep an eye on them because I'm taking people, it's almost like going to the moon. I'm taking people to places that even if you have the clothing on, I remember there's a scientist up there who's studying to make clothing for soldiers. So he had like sensors on the soldiers, and they were collecting data, and we went out, we snowmobiled in 40 minutes out from Hall Beach, small community. And on the way out there, she couldn't feel her feet anymore, and she had all the stuff on. And they snowmobiled back, had to warm up her feet again. She didn't get hurt, but her feet swelled up a little bit. And she said, I can't understand. I read that the boots were rated to minus 100. Well, here's how you interpret that stuff. And it could be dangerous. You could lose your feet. Minus 100 means the rubber won't fail to minus 100. But it's your body that warms you, not the boots. If your body can't warm itself, that you could be in any clothing you want and you'll die. So some people's bodies are just not designed for that weather, and I have to be ready for that kind of thing. So I have extra gloves. I'm checking that their nose isn't sticking out of the balaclava, that kind of things. And so I think Liam grew up in, he's Irish Catholic. He grew up during the Kid in Troubles under English rule. I think that gives you a really powerful perspective on colonialism, British colonialism and power. And he studied history. And he also worked for Goldman Sachs, then went and started writing about commodities with the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and now works for Bloomberg. So he's an expert in natural resources, mining and oil. By the way, he's also expert in Elon Musk. He covers Elon Musk because it's energy with cars. But he's also a history and colonialization expert. And his writing is fantastic. I think we're at 6 parts now. So Liam's great, and I don't even have a photo editor. I edit my own photos with Liam. He's really a fantastic collaborator. So I think for me, there's different levels. Like The Guardian did a Q&A with me. Sometimes I suggest that. I'm like, look, no one's ever going to write to this. They're going to guess, but just do a Q&A with me. You can write some others, like a brief in the beginning. So I help them structure different things. But I think that the places I'm going to have been to, so few photographers have gone there and photographed it this in depth that there aren't many writers that can write, say, from sight on the ground, and it's hard to go to and very, very expensive. So some writers I'm like, that was okay, I've read that before, and some writers are like, wow, the way you put that together. So I would, again, Liam Denning, those Bloomberg opinion pieces are top notch. Even his observations and the data sets from Bloomberg are really, really strong. So like, give you things that Liam finds. You know what the most important thing to building oil pads and oil drilling in the North Slope of Alaska are? Gravel. You know how much gravel costs to get up there? A lot. Without gravel, doesn't matter how much oil you have up there, they have to have a gravel supply. And he has like stats on how much it costs to ship and build and just fascinating little nuggets like that.
Let's take one more question.
Hope I don't spend too long. You can email me if you have questions. One question each.
So I feel like the whole Arctic. This is a very coarse takeaway, but I feel like the whole story, as it's published and as it was pitched, is like a sort of militaristic frontier story. But the way that you've talked about it is, I would say, is like pretty overwhelmingly about climate change and like a changing world. So how do you square those differences?
Well, I think for me, the ultimate takeaway, I like to think, the photo editors that I learned the most from is, I remember me and Sadie were talking to the story and she said, I'm like, it's about military. She goes, no, this is a story about the unknown. And that's when I realized I was working with photo editors who had a sophistication that was beyond just picking good photos. They were looking for something way more than just taking 10 good pictures, doing a nice layout, that had to be something else. And I got to admit, it became this thing where I'm like, I've been waiting for this moment. You don't get it sometimes, because sometimes magazines don't have the budgets, or you don't get to work with places like this very often, where I felt like, wow, this is going to be like a several year journey. And it's like things that mean something. I would be told a word, go look for this. And I'm like, okay, well, sometimes I'd be like, okay, good luck. And then I'd be like, whoa, it's happening. But for me, what it really, sort of the deeper part is, we use the word power very loosely as like human beings. And I really think like we have like nuclear missiles and all these tanks, and we're going to go in the Arctic and we're going to control this thing. And in the end, we have I don't know what the budget is for the Department of Defense. You can't fight climate change with it. That's the absurdity of it all. We can claim all the territory we want, but if the ice cap in Greenland melts, I mean, I think this whole city is going to be underwater, and there ain't any military or gun or submarine going to stop that. So I think, sorry to go so dark on everybody. It's like doom, Louie. But, I think there is hope. Okay. But I will say, for me, I think in history, the books I've read that, that have shifted my consciousness. Jennifer Bachwell is one of my mentors. She's a great filmmaker. She made a film called, about Ed Bertinsky, called Manufactured Landscapes. You should watch that film. It's a very good film. It talks about consciousness shifting. And I think that the militarization, like the Russia and the soldiers going up there, was this moment that I thought needed to be covered. And everybody was busy in Iraq and Afghanistan. Important things, everything, all of this is important. But I felt like there's a shift happening, in that the military is going up there with our tax dollars, and what are they doing? And do they know what they're doing? And from the soldier to the policymakers, what's happening there? And what gets ordered, and what actually even happens or changes by the time you get to that soldier all the way on the front. And that's what I learned covering those wars. And I think that when we think of the Arctic, and when we think of sort of what's coming, is industrialization always follows militarization. Like those colonial ships that went up into the Arctic, they weren't going up there because like, hey, we're going to go explore and find some new land and make friends with indigenous people. We all know what happened with those histories. Mining, oil, that all comes, after that. But if you think of those two ships that got stuck in the Arctic on the Franklin expedition, I'll end with this. That's why you should read that book. One was called the HMS Erebus. One was called the HMS Terror. They were mortar ships that were out of date, and they converted them into exploration ships run by the Navy. And when they went up there, the HMS Terror was the ship that bombarded Fort McHenry when the Star-Spangled Banner was written. That ship crashed in the Arctic was a part of this country's identity. That's the ship that was bombarding Baltimore. And now it went up to the Arctic, and it had all this power to do all these things. It has this great history. And ice destroyed it. Nature destroyed it. And I think that there's nothing they could have did. And they didn't listen to indigenous people at the time who were warning them and saying, hey, look at the way we survived for thousands of years. And they all died. So that's a really dark way of ending. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. And just a reminder, April 12th is our big photo book symposium. And next semester, our show is going to be...
I'm going to take a selfie. Hold on. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Stay where you are.
The next semester show is going to be Jim Marshall's photographs of the Grateful Dead, which is a whole different change from this. That should be a lot of fun.
Way more uplifting than doom and destruction with Louie.
Okay.
Oh, there's so many of you. Hold on. It needs to go. So many of you. Okay, that's almost every. Oh, I'm out of the picture.
It'll be on Louie's Facebook page tonight. Thank you all for coming.